Hi everyone, Cranthony Banktano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and this new Lil Baby project, it's not good. Lil Baby is an Atlanta rapper, singer, songwriter. This is his second solo full-length commercial album, and admittedly, I did not go into this LP with a lot of high hopes, mostly because when he broke onto the scene in 2018, I thought his debut was pretty underwhelming. His collaboration record with Gunna that dropped that same year, which was very popular, I thought was even worse. But it's still been a couple of years since that moment in time, and I guess part of me hoped that Lil Baby would have spent that time maturing artistically in some way, shape, or form, and I just can't say that happened. The many problems I have with this LP on individual tracks and more broadly apply to a range of characteristics. The vocals and vocal performances, the production, the songwriting, none of which on my turn I found to be enjoyable or even memorable. Let's start with the vocals. And vocally, I've always had an issue with Lil Baby's sound and style, as it's not really a sound and a style. Many times he has been said to be just a Young Thug clone, but I feel like going that far would imply that at least his range and talent level is within the realm of Young Thug's, and it's really not. Just listen to the song on here where Young Thug is featured, and it is a night and day difference in terms of dynamics, charisma, intelligibility, as Lil Baby just is muttering his way through most of these tracks. Lil Baby maybe does display a bit more vocal range on my turn, but it's not much more than he's had in the past. There are still many tracks here where he just sounds like a lesser version of Young Thug, and then again there are moments where he sounds like he's pulling some inspiration from Wayne, also from Future as well, specifically on a song here that features Future, where he spends the first leg of the track with a Future inflection, a Future flow, so by the time Future features on the song, the feature from Future, is pretty much pointless because you've spent the entire track thus far sounding like Future. Form your future feature for former future features, got it. So only looking at this record from a vocal standpoint, Lil Baby is not really any more impressive than he was a few years ago, not any more distinct, still pretty one-dimensional, one note, not a whole lot of flows at Lil Baby's disposal, not a whole lot of range or inflection or character. Dude is really putting me to sleep half the time. There are maybe a few tracks where he sounds a touch more animated, but it's not a night and day difference. And I will say the song Consistent is maybe the one track here where vocally he sounds pretty raw, pretty emotive, lots of conviction in his voice, but would I buy into this before I do a better rapper or singer? Not necessarily. And what's even worse is the auto-tune on Lil Baby's voice for the majority of this LP. Now, in general, there's nothing wrong with auto-tune or vocal effects, especially in this style of trap where a little can go a long way. But Lil Baby is already not that expressive of a singer and a rapper, so when you throw that auto-tune on, the more subtle and human qualities of his voice are just totally sucked out of the equation. On top of it, the way the auto-tune is applied and the way his voice is mixed on many of these tracks, it just sounds really pitchy. It's not pleasurable at all. So while there are a few tracks on this record I found to be tolerable, just vocally, this thing is pretty much a non-starter, and it's almost a non-starter on the instrumental front too. I think there are maybe a handful of pretty good or impressive beats in this 20-song track list, especially the intro track, Get Ugly, where Baby himself in the lyrics refers to how good the beat is, and it is a good instrumental. So every once in a while on the instrumental side, you do get an epic beat, but a vast majority of the totally half-assed, painfully plain beats on this thing follow a stupidly simple formula. Step one is grab a simple melodic loop off of an online sample library like splice.com, somewhere like that. Take that and basically do nothing with it outside of looping it. Make sure to mix it so low you barely hear it anyway. So grabbing it in the first place was almost pointless, but you can't have like no melody and no chords in the track, so you gotta throw something in there. Punctuate that sample with the thinnest snares and hi-hats ever heard in a trap song, then sequence them in the most generic patterns that you can without getting called out for doing the same exact thing over and over. All that's left now is to throw in your kicks and your bass, which of course you pump up so high the only place it's going to sound good is on some laptop speakers. Of course, you're also going to want the EQ on Baby's voice to not be all that flattering, so there is that. And that's pretty much how a great deal of songs on this album come together. Finally, there's the songwriting on the record, which isn't as terrible as much as it is just absent. I mean, there's not a whole lot in terms of structure or contrast or variation across these songs, so don't expect anything in terms of like a big hook. I mean, the Moneybag Yo featured track on this thing just kind of sounds like an endless chorus that never changes into anything else. So very few of these songs actually pop with a nice chorus. I do give Lil Baby some credit though, because there are tracks here where he does focus pretty nicely lyrically on a central idea. A lot of the time when Lil Baby isn't flexing or just talking about some flashy shit, he is trying to really bore into some genuine feelings of sadness, tragedy, loneliness. I don't deny the emotion going into this LP is authentic and legitimate, but given that Lil Baby doesn't have the strongest voice, and on top of it, he's not the strongest lyricist either, he's not a great conduit for it. He doesn't exactly ooze relatability. I would say when it comes to communicating and transmitting his emotions through his music, Lil Baby fails pretty handily, as pretty much everything about him and My Turn is so painfully below average. And that's the thing, I can't even say anything on this LP is like okay or decent. It's just all so below average. And Lil Baby brings nothing to the table in terms of making up for that in any way, not even a distinct style. So even though it's still pretty early in the year, I have listened to a lot more albums in 2020 than I've actually reviewed. And still, My Turn is one of the most uninspired and mind-numbing listens I've had thus far. This Lil Baby record, it's not good.